tienen que saber inglés. Pero bueno, capaz que se guían un poco con los subtítulos de algunas palabras que se les escapan. La cosa es así, le preguntan a él, al señor James Gray, sobre... le hacen una pregunta de esas que es difícil de hacer, porque es como que yo le pregunte a usted a Scorsese eh, o a Cameron, ponele, che, Cameron, ¿es verdad que en Avatar estás hablando sobre eh, religión? Y por lo general los directores te van a decir, ¿pero qué me estás diciendo, flaco? Y James Gray hace eso. Y rápidamente contesta otra cosa y vuelve a ese tema, dándole la razón sin decirle expresamente. Y es como que es una respuesta maravillosa. Pero vamos a verla. Vamos a ver primero lo que le pregunta el sujeto, que está bueno lo que le pregunta. O sea, está bueno en lo que dice, pero no lo que... Pero siempre es difícil de preguntar este tipo de cosas porque nada, no, es como... Le estás pidiendo al mago que te diga cómo se hace el truco, básicamente.
In the corner. Watching your movies, I get a lot of archetypal religious connotations that are kind of diffused through the story. You know, what's that? Sorry. Lost City of Z, it's almost like a Persevillian search for the Holy Grail.
Bien, le dice que ve muchas connotaciones religiosas en sus películas, que que The Lost City of Z es como la búsqueda del Santo Grial,
We Own the Night, kind of the Cain and Abel story.
que We Own the Night es la historia de Caín y Abel,
Even Ad Astra, it could be Journey to the Underworld to Save Your Father, or on top of that, Sins of the Father
y que Ad Astra es los pecados del padre.
and its implications on the child. I wanted to know, was this a conscious decision?
Le pregunta si fue una decisión consciente. Ahí la pifia. Ahí la pifia. Y con lo que dice ahora, más la pifia todavía.
That these archetypal religious connotations come out?
Mira, ahí se dio cuenta James Gray, che, ahí la cagaste, porque me está diciendo, che, todo esto, vos contaste esto, che, ¿fue consciente lo que estás haciendo?
Of your storytelling? If yes, I'd like to know what that says about you.
Listen, buddy.
Yeah.
Mira, esta respuesta es hermosa.
It was the best question I ever got in my life, and you just blew it.
Fue la mejor pregunta que me hicieron en mi vida y la acabas de desperdiciar.
I'm kidding.
That's okay. That's
I'm
fine.
kidding, I'm kidding.
You think
Bien,
that says
lo que hace es contestar otra pregunta. Dice, no sé si puedo contestar esa pregunta.
wow? Sure.
A project to make, and what are you going to commit to? I'm going to answer the first question first because I don't know what the hell my answer is to the second question. So,
Se voy a contestar la primera pregunta, pues no sé cómo contestar la segunda pregunta. Y contestando la primera pregunta empieza a contestar la segunda. Esperen que vean.
it's a problem. A weird thing, like I start feeling a mood that I want to communicate in the movie. I remember with Two Lovers, for example, it was like this guy at the beach who was, who was heartbroken. I remember that was the first thing that came to me. I wanted to do something like that, and maybe an updating of The Underground Man that Dostoevsky wrote about several of his novellas. But and then this was a mood that I felt, and for the latest thing, I felt like, floating in space. What does that mean? I saw this footage of Ed White, who was later actually killed, but was the first American to go on a spacewalk, and the first person really, because the Russian who did it for like 2 seconds. He was the first one who was doing a lengthy spacewalk, and he felt a weird space euphoria. But you see the footage, and it's horrifying, and he was apparently going through euphoria, but it's also horrifying. I thought, well, that's interesting, and then I decided maybe to explore that avenue a little bit. But maybe I can connect it to your question.
Acá va. Sobre los arquetipos. Él le contesta sobre los arquetipos, porque claro, al tomar una historia religiosa, digamos, clásica de la Biblia, él lo tira para el lado de los arquetipos, ¿no? de responder a determinados arquetipos.
My taste is for archetypes because, there is a kind of egotistical and pompous approach I take, which is a little bit humiliating to admit now. But we're here, I'll be honest, so why not, right? You want to hear the honesty. You want the thing to last. You want people to be able to see it.
Querés que la cosa dure. Querés que eso funcione y que pueda ser visto durante mucho tiempo.
50 years or 100 years from now, and for it to make some sense. You want to be able to contribute to the medium, not in a way that just allows you to buy a big house in Beverly Hills or something, really great cars, just fucking make a sequel to a remake or whatever.
O sea, querés contribuir al medio, pero no para ganar guita o para hacer una secuela al pedo, sino para hacer algo que dure, que quede en el tiempo.
Which I could do, and I would be much richer than I am now. I would also make something that probably people wouldn't be caring about. And maybe this comes from ego, but it's not only ego, because some of it is that, one of the lessons you learn in life, I think, is that this idea of being famous is nonsense. I was talking to my friend's son. He's 19 years old, and he's extremely well educated, and he goes to an elite university in the United States. Extremely well educated. And I remember when J. Edgar came out, I said, "Do you know who J. Edgar Hoover is?" He
Cuando salió J. Edgar de Eastwood.
said, "Yeah, he was the president before Roosevelt."
Oh.
And you're like, "No, that's Herbert." And my point isn't that he's not smart. The kid is brilliant. My point is that you realize, oh wait, Herbert Hoover and J. Edgar Hoover are now kind of ancient history. Now, J. Edgar Hoover was forced out in 1973. I was alive. This kid was born in 2000, whatever. So I can't blame him for it. And you realize that anyone who's seeking fame is kind of a fool, because there's really like Shakespeare and Homer and maybe two other people or whatever in Western civilization that you know of. So the only thing you've got left, if that's the case, that should drive you, if you're an artist, if I may call myself that, is you try to contribute as best you can to this thing that we call progress, kind of to push things forward a little bit. And if nobody knows who you are, that's going to be the case. But that's okay. One person walking through a museum who sees a painting that nobody ever heard of that moves them greatly, and Picasso sees a piece of African art and he makes that sculpture with the bicycle seat. In other words, it's not about the individual anymore. It's about what can you do to contribute to the culture.
Bueno, él cuenta ahí una anécdota de un niño que va a una universidad de elite, que tiene 20 años, que bueno, evidentemente sabe mucho, que es muy inteligente y que se confunde, cuando sale J. Edgar, se confunde le pregunta, ¿vos sabés quién fue J. Edgar? Y le dice, sí, fue presidente antes de Roosevelt. Y se confunde a Herbert Hoover con J. Edgar Hoover, que era el policía. Entonces lo que dice James Gray es como perseguir la fama es una estupidez, porque aún esos tipos tan grosos como son, viene alguien que nació en el 2000 y se confunde de quiénes son. Eso se va apagando. Lo que quedan son no perseguir la fama a un nivel quién soy yo, sino de la obra en sí, para contribuir a la cultura, como dice ahí.
And so, for me, if I look at the past as prologue, it's archetypes that really last.
Si miro el pasado como un prólogo, son los arquetipos los que realmente duran. Y esto va muy en sintonía con Cameron, va muy en sintonía con... O sea, vieron que ahora se ve como... A veces se confunde estereotipo con arquetipo. Y al arquetipo se le dice estereotipo y demás. Pero acá está respondiendo bien la pregunta que le hizo el otro sobre la religión. Él no le está diciendo, sí, yo adapté a tal cosa. Pero sí está diciendo que se basa en arquetipos. Y esos son arquetipos.
For Western civilization, of course, for the world, it's very different. But for Western civilization, the Greeks kind of figured it out,
Los griegos lo descubrieron todo.
didn't they? I mean, if you, Oedipus Rex is still the most relevant. I mean, like, it's so important to who we are. Shakespeare, it doesn't really veer far from Shakespeare. You know, the beauties of Shakespeare are still understood, even though the language is beautiful but difficult for us. So when you pursue the creation of a work, you're really doing it not for money or for fame or even for yourself. You're doing it, as my very good sculptor friend says, he says you do it for time.
Bueno, creo que eso se entendió todo porque de hecho estaba bien traducido.
It's what you're trying to do to give back. Now, if you become successful and rich and you can get a nice table at a restaurant, that's an excellent byproduct. But that's not why you got to do it. That's not why you should be driven to do it. And so that is connected to the creation. What matters over time? What matters over time to me is my relationship with my father, my relationship with my mother, my brother, my relationship with my wife, my children, how I see them grow up, what kind of world we live in, what's wrong with the world. I think pointing out what's wrong with the world is very important for artists. That's what should motivate much of what we do. If we point out what's right with the world, who cares? All you have is hope. The whole world blows up. You're the last person surviving. You hope there's one other person. You hope there's a can of tuna fish. You can eat it. We always have hope. You don't need hope. You need someone or some people, really, because that's what cinema is, from people. It's a collaborative medium, to point out what's wrong. And to me, that's beautiful. To me, that's the reason that we pursue this dream.
Señalar lo que está mal.
So it's connected, your question. And there is a religiosity to it, I guess. And by the way, it's the first time I've ever been asked that question.
Qué gran cierre este, ¿eh? Y hay una religiosidad, seguramente.
To it, I guess. And by the way, it's the first time I've ever been asked that
Es
question.
la primera vez que me hacen esa
And yet
pregunta.
it is clearly true that there's
Y es claramente cierto que la
the
religión,
immigrant is unbelievably religious. And
que de inmigrantes, una película muy religiosa.
in a way, it forms her whole code, right? She cannot violate that code that deal she makes with God, or when she does, it destroys her inside. I just feel like it's part of the collective myth that allows us to survive in this world. Now,
Eso es una gran respuesta también, ¿no? Siento que es parte del mito colectivo que nos permite sobrevivir en el mundo. Que es medio una forma de decir, ¿cómo no voy a hacer una historia religiosa si absolutamente todo lo que hacemos se vale por esos medios? ¿No? Obviamente lo de él es consciente, no es de rebote. Pero, o sea, siempre estamos volviendo a las historias.
Now we know post-1968, we know all that myth-making is bullshit, we know it's all a fantasy, but we need it. We still need it, even though we know it's bullshit. So it's best to kind of acknowledge that fantasy. You know, I have very unlimited tastes. You know, I've said, you know, we need narrative and we need that fantasy, but my taste with narrative is quite wide. You know, I'll accept things that feel not narratively based as long as I can trace a thread, a through line of thought. But ultimately we come back to these myths. I hate to sound Campbellian.
Es muy bueno. Qué gran respuesta. Me gustaría poder, si alguien sabe subtitular, que baje este video y lo subtitule en castellano bien y lo suba a un video, a un canal de YouTube, porque es una gran respuesta, para ver una y otra vez. Gran respuesta. Acá él menciona esto de que él no está en contra, a él le gusta, digamos, que las películas estén, digamos, que tomen una narración, pero que su mundo de la narración es bastante amplio y que hay películas que no tienen una narración tan clara, pero si él ve un hilo de pensamiento, lo banca.
And trace a thread, a through line of thought. But ultimately we come back to these myths.
Pero en última instancia siempre estamos volviendo a estos mitos.
I hate to sound Campbellian.
Odio sonar como Campbellian, que es, bueno, Joseph Campbell.
He has his limitations, I think, in some ways, but he really was onto something. And I think this is what makes our pursuit beautiful. Thank you. You're welcome.
James Graham got the lead there.
Qué grande James Gray, qué gran respuesta. Esto es... y qué gran pregunta también. Porque mucho tiene que ver eso, ¿no? O sea, si vos lo tenés a James Gray enfrente, tenés que hacer una buena pregunta. Y esta es una buena pregunta porque es alguien que entendió su cine, digamos, que se molestó en entenderlo y recibió una pregunta, una respuesta magnífica. Y bueno, por eso es vital hacer ese trabajo de con los directores, ¿no? Porque uno podría decir, cinéfilamente, uno puede decir, me encanta Grey, buenísimo sus películas, y no, qué bien qué lindo este plano de Ad Astra, y qué sé yo, eso sería verlo cinéfilamente. Ahora, esta pregunta no es cinéfilamente. Esta pregunta es, digamos, me dediqué un tiempo, las pensé, no tiene nada que ver con la cinefilia. Lo digo porque también, obviamente, hay gente que, un James Gray, un maestro, qué sé yo, ¿y de qué hablan su película? No tengo más puta idea. Y bueno,